When we think of horror game protagonists, most of them fall into the same kind of mold. Cops with guns, soldiers with scars, teenagers who made bad decisions in the woods. Back in 1995, Sierra Online gave us something different. Adrienne Delaney. She wasn't trained for combat, she wasn't a puzzle-solving detective, and she wasn't a slasher victim waiting for her turn. She was just a writer, newly married, newly moved into a mansion filled with shadows. In one of the strangest experiments of the FMV era, Adrienne became one of the rarest things in gaming. A horror protagonist who felt painfully, hauntingly human. With developers experimenting to see how far they could push both technology and storytelling. In 1995 alone, we had several standout horror titles. Clock Tower gave us the terrifying Scissor Man and a young girl running for her life. Shivers, Sierra's own attempt at a first-person puzzle horror game, played like The Seventh Guest with more occult trappings. And of course, there was Phantasmagoria, a game unlike anything else on the market. Looking at this landscape, it's safe to say most horror games of the era weren't character-driven in the way we think of today. They were largely puzzle boxes or showcases for grotesque imagery. The protagonist often functioned more as an avatar than a fully fleshed out person. Phantasmagoria, however, was an outlier. While Clock Tower touched on Jennifer's vulnerability and never explored her inner life with a depth that Roberta Williams gave Adrienne, Phantasmagoria placed a fully realized human being, played by a live actor, Victoria Morcell, at the center of a gothic nightmare. The choice gave the horror a level of intimacy Pixels alone struggled to capture in the mid-90s. Delaney does not fit the typical mold we see in video game characters of this period. She isn't a super soldier. She isn't a police officer or detective. She doesn't even aspire to be a hero. She's a novelist, a creative type, and newly married to Donald Gordon, a successful photographer. He somehow manages to purchase the sprawling Carnavash estate on a remote island, a setting that feels ripped straight out of Gothic literature. This mansion becomes the crucible in which Adrienne's strength is tested. What stands out about her is her sheer normalcy. She looks and behaves like a regular woman. No combat training, no hidden martial arts background, no convenient gun-handling skills. And unlike Resident Evil, which would arrive just 1 year later and lean heavily on the empowerment fantasy of arming yourself against monsters, Phantasmagoria never hands her that luxury. She survives through intuition, problem-solving, and sheer resilience. That might sound minor, but it's a profound difference. Harry Mason from Silent Hill is also an everyman on paper, yet he dispatches monsters without hesitation and rarely reflects on the toll it takes. Adrienne, by contrast, reacts with shock, fear, and believable vulnerability to what she encounters. She's closer in spirit to Jennifer from Clock Tower, just a normal person stumbling through unthinkable circumstances, barely surviving by wit and luck. And in that sense, Adrienne feels like one of the most authentic horror protagonists of her era. This is where Phantasmagoria becomes truly unique. Listen, I'm going to be up front. I'm a dude. I can't fully experience what it would be like from her perspective. It's just not possible. The design makes it clear that her voice, her reactions, and her emotional journey shape how we experience the mansion and its horrors. Every puzzle solution is filtered through her commentary. Every shocking discovery comes with her gasp, her hesitation, or her moment of reflection. Victoria Morcell's performance ensures that Adrienne doesn't feel like a detached player's surrogate. She feels like a person enduring something awful in real time. And while supernatural elements, the haunting, possessions, visions, fuel the plot, the scariest moments in Phantasmagoria are grounded in something disturbingly real. Abuse. Manipulation, gaslighting, and the cycle of domestic violence becomes central to the horror. Roberta Williams didn't shy away from portraying the cycle, and she integrated it in a rare authenticity for the medium. This game mirrors well-documented cycles of abuse, making Don's transformation into a violent, possessed abuser feel both supernatural and horribly believable. Don grows increasingly irritable, dismissive, and controlling. Adrienne feels the pressure of walking on eggshells. His affection cools, replaced by a simmering frustration that the player sees building long before Adrienne confronts it. The tension boils over. The abuse turns physical, verbal, and even sexual. In these scenes, Phantasmagoria become one of the first games to depict domestic violence so explicitly, shocking players and fueling censorship debates. Don's violence is framed as both demonic possession and terrifyingly real-world behavior. After his worst outburst, Don apologizes, shows flashes of tenderness, or blames his actions on stress or emotional forces. These moments echo real patterns of abuse where victims feel conflicted, terrified one moment, hopeful for change the next. A fragile sense of normalcy returns, but never lasts. The cycle begins anew, escalating each time. Why is this cycle so terrifying in a game? Because it traps her, and by extension the player, in psychological snares. You see the danger, but you also feel the dread of its inevitability. The unpredictability becomes its own form of horror. This dynamic is what makes Phantasmagoria so difficult to sit through at times. Yes, the gore effects are notorious, faces torn apart, grotesque transformations, heads cleaved in two, but the moments that cut deepest are Don's escalating abuse. We watch him spiral, consumed by possession, but also by the all-too-real hunger for control. Adrienne is trapped between two enemies, her husband, who's become unrecognizable, and the mansion itself, which is soaked in centuries of evil. Every hallway and secret chamber conspires against her survival. She isn't a monster hunter or an action hero, she's a woman fighting against betrayal in the place that's supposed to be her home. That dual horror, personal and supernatural, makes Phantasmagoria stand out. Let's talk about how rare she is as a character in her time. Between 1990 and 1995, very few horror games put women at the forefront. The short list includes these: Emily Hartwood from Alone in the Dark, Laura Bow, The Dagger of Amun-Ra, Jennifer Simpson of Clock Tower, Laura Harris of D, and of course we have Adrienne Delaney of Phantasmagoria. For the most part, that's it. And among these, most didn't feature deeply character-driven narratives. Laura Bow leans towards mystery. Emily is essentially interchangeable with Edward Carnby, and Laura Harris's story in D was surreal, but not nearly as grounded as living the emotional experience. Jennifer came close, embodying that final girl archetype, but even she didn't get the same treatment that Adrienne was given. That makes Adrienne different. She isn't remembered because she was armed or unstoppable. She's remembered because she wasn't. Her resilience, her believability, and her being ordinary is actually her strength. In the sea of avatars and archetypes, she was real. Upon release, Phantasmagoria sold extremely well. 7 CDs worth of FMV spectacle drew plenty of attention. But Adrienne herself sparked divided opinions. Some critics dismissed her as too passive, arguing she was simply swept along by the narrative. Others praised her grounded realism, saying she was one of the few horror game characters who genuinely felt like a human being. Morcel's performance is what tied it all together. Acting on a blue screen with limited context, she managed to inject life, vulnerability, and humanity into her character. Her reactions, her body language, even her moments of silence gave weight to a story that could have otherwise collapsed under camp. To this day, Adrienne stands out as one of the rare FMV characters who transcended the limitations of the medium. Looking back, her character represents a turning point. She showed what horror games could be. She showed that horror in games could be more than survival of the body. It could be about survival of identity, dignity, and emotional resilience. Her story isn't a long one, despite spanning 7 discs, but it lingers because it grapples with real-world issues magnified by supernatural horror. She embodies an agency not by fighting back with weapons, but by enduring trauma and persevering against overwhelming odds. In her, we see a prototype for more nuanced female leads that would emerge in later horror titles. Phantasmagoria is remembered for its excess. The 7 discs, the infamous gore, the controversies that saw it banned in multiple countries, but what makes the game endure isn't the spectacle. It's this character. She didn't rely on weapons or bravado, but on resilience and survival. She's one of the few female protagonists of her time whose story wasn't about empowerment through force, but surviving through horror. In her, we see the fears of everyday life made monstrous. The haunted house, the abusive partner, the shadows of history that refuse to stay buried. And that, more than any jump scare, is what makes her unforgettable.